Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The JAYREELZ podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, and excellent spirits. And you know what the latest and greatest is. Another NFL season about to raise the curtain later tonight, or depending on when you're listening to this, or even watching this for that matter. As from soup to nuts, I will uncover everything what we could possibly expect of this forthcoming season, as this is the JAYREELZ podcast with your host, JAYREELZ. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Monday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And let's get right to it. Let's get to the storylines. We'll break down all the divisions. I'll have my over-under numbers, my surprises, disappointments, as well as my knockout pick, my Super Bowl pick, and also a preview of my Steelers. As when I go through the divisions, I'll hold off on the Steelers to the very end, but you know that's going to be a big part considering the the AFC North is stacked and should be competitive from pillar to post. But we'll start off with the storylines, and there are plenty. And even though yours truly, as I'm recording this, where I am not 100% pumped up into the season, and I've explained that on my YouTube channel at JAYREELZ in a short that I just put up a few days ago, and not really just wrapping my arms around the season just yet. Maybe it's because I'm not letting go summer. I'm wrapped up in the baseball because the Mets, as of right this moment, they are this close for the final spot in the NL wild card, and we understand they're the Mets. At some point, the shoe will drop and the glass slipper will break right before midnight, but that's baseball and this is the NFL. But yes, that is one storyline, I guess personally, that you're probably wondering, JAYREELZ, what are you nuts? It's football. Everybody's looking forward to it. Fantasy teams, gambling, anything that you can imagine about this upcoming season. But yeah, sorry, I am just not there as of yet. Maybe Sunday, 1 o'clock, when the Steelers are in Atlanta, as you see me watching on YouTube in Steeler garb, which I rarely wear. I know I had some Met paraphernalia and was in blue and orange there to support my beloved Amazons. And here I am now with the black and gold. But for the storylines, let's get right to it. Forget about me and my personal preferences. The first one, of course, are the Chiefs. Can they three-peat? And that's going to be the big question all year long. Now, as long as they have number 15 under center, and even if he's hobbling on one leg, as we saw 2 years ago when they beat the Eagles in the Super Bowl, if he's alive and breathing, chances are he's going to end up winning. But we understand they're not going to win every game. They're not going to win every season. But I'm sure there is going to be a laser focus for this team to do something that has not been done in the Super Bowl era. It has been done 3 straight championships, where you go back to 65, the Packers, who won that year, and then, of course, the subsequent years, 66, 67, where they won Super Bowl 1 and 2. Of course, that's not going to count because the first championship during that run was not because of the advent of the Super Bowl. And then we've seen it many times over the years, whether it was the Steelers trying to do it after winning Super Bowls 9 and 10, losing 11, or even 13, 14, losing 15. The Niners with an opportunity to three-peat there in the late 80s into early 90s, no good. The Dallas Cowboys going back-to-back, losing a championship game to the San Francisco 49ers, sandwiched in between that Super Bowl they won afterwards, where the head coach was Barry Switzer. Then, of course, the Patriot teams who have won back-to-back, wasn't able to get that third one. And now you have the Chiefs who are looking to see, and of course the Miami Dolphins back in the 70s when one of those two titles, they had the perfect season. But now it's all on the Chiefs. Whether or not the personnel that they've been able to bring on, their offensive line looks stout as they re-upped on Creed Humphrey, the center who got the biggest payday for that position in the history of the sport. Obviously, the situation regarding Mahomes, where we know as long as he's healthy and upright, they have as good a shot as anyone. Travis Kelce, maybe long in the tooth. I'm sure he's still going to be effective, but with all the years that he's played in the league and the pounding that he's taken, will he be able wear and tear throughout his career and the 2024 season? Will he be one that will make it through and into January and possibly February? All these things factor in, and we can say that for every team because we know health is of the biggest factor when it comes to any team winning a Super Bowl or a team that's going to get the breaks or the bounces. The drop by Stephon Diggs, where it probably could have iced the game for the Buffalo Bills in the division round last year against Kansas City. Or Zay Flowers fumbling the ball there at the goal line where the Ravens are going in for the tie. And if they would have tied it at that point, who knows what the complexion of the game would have remained. And even in the Super Bowl, you want to throw that in the mix as well, where Brock Purdy had a 3rd and 4 deep in Chief territory, where if he would have completed one pass, they would have burned the clock down to 3 seconds, and it would have kicked the field goal, and the game would have been over, and the Niners would have been the defending champs. So sometimes God plays in these games, or even the football gods, and for the Chiefs, who did get a couple of breaks, as I detailed along the way, but that's how, when you have a winning culture and when you have a franchise that knows its way around winning the way the Chiefs do, this is why you've won 3 Super Bowls in the last 5 years. So can they do it again? That's the big question. I will answer that later on as we move it along. The second one, and it's interesting because when we look back at last year at this time, before they had their Monday night matchup against the Bills, a lot of people looked at Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. And we know what happened 4 plays into his Jet career. Now, here we are, fast forward a year later, same stage, different stadium, different team. But for Rodgers, and going back to his old stomping grounds are not too far from Santa Clara at Chico, California. And for Rodgers, with all of the pressure, not only just here in New York, as we all know, Jets have not been to a Super Bowl since Joe Willie did it back, 55 years ago. And with the Jet fan that is as beyond starving, thirsting for any success, let alone a Super Bowl. And for Rodgers to see if he could just make it out of this game so the Jet fan could exhale and think that maybe they could have number 8, their quarterback, under center for the remaining 16 games and hopefully beyond. So the expectations of this franchise, which were huge last year, had to be put on pause because of the Achilles injury. And then now, here he is a year later, and everything that could really shape into a competitive AFC, as we know, it's very top-heavy. Kansas City, you want to throw in Cincinnati, especially with a healthy Burrow. You want to, of course, throw in Rodgers. Obviously, you have the reigning MVP and one Lamar Jackson in Baltimore. You have all these teams that are going to be near the top of the AFC, battling it out to see who will represent in the Super Bowl down in New Orleans there come February. So for the Jets, to me, that is another big storyline that we're going to look forward to, whether or not they're going to be able to have a healthy Rodgers after game 1, and of course throughout the course of the season, and how he's going to produce, considering his last year in Green Bay was subpar, under 500. They were 8-9, and now with a new lease on life prior to the injury, and now having to deal with that to bring that into an upcoming season where it casts a little bit of doubt, because we don't know, 41 years old, coming off an Achilles injury, whether or not he's going to be able to withstand that throughout the course of a 17-game season. So to me, that is storyline number 2. Number 3, and I mentioned the team a second ago, but it's going to be a big, giant focus to see whether or not Lamar Jackson could deliver his team to the promised land. And with all of the press clippings here leading into training camp, where his coach, and I get it, he's going to defend him, but defends him to the point where it's just disgusting. It's ad nauseum. Because he just wants to blame the media for, oh, well, that's what you guys think. And Lamar, he's a champion in our heart no matter what, so on and so forth. No, he's not. Where's the rings on his finger? He has the hardware. That we cannot dispute. But where are the banners and where are the rings that back up those MVP performances of last year and about 4 or 5 years ago? And with everything that he said coming into camp, he's lighter. And you would think he's going to be that much more quicker. Now, remember, he is lean. He is elusive, but because with him being, I'll use this term, a little bit light in the ass, he's not Dante Culpepper at 6'6", 260, but knowing that he's coming in about 15 pounds lighter, so he could really be that much more effective when it comes to using his legs, getting out of the pocket, scrambling, etc. But if he takes that one big hit from a linebacker, defensive lineman, and I'm not wishing this on him by any means, but because he's not made from a chisel of clay, that he's not indestructible. He's not Josh Allen. He's not Cam Newton and the aforementioned Culpepper, where if he does take a hit, and we've known prior to last year, he's ended his seasons with a couple of injuries where he's been on the shelf and his teams have done nothing in the postseason, or one year didn't even make it into the playoffs. So that is one storyline that I'm going to be obviously paying big time attention to, considering the AFC North and the battles that those teams are going to go at all year long. But between John Harbaugh's comments and even the GM saying that, I see a focus on Lamar Jackson that I haven't seen throughout my tenure. And that's Eric DeCosta, the GM of the team. So, all right, we could talk the talk. We could say all of the glowing things about Jackson and what he's done in the first 6 years of his career, coming off of an MVP, that much more lighter. Yes, he's a champion. Yes, he's on a mission. He's all that. Well, it starts tomorrow night and throughout the season. So to me, that's another storyline. And I hate to even bring this team up, and I'll try to keep this as tidy as possible, but only because as of right this second, he has not signed an extension. Neither has his coach. But we all know when it comes to Jerry Jones and the big giant star down in Big D, you already know that the pressure is going to be on those two guys to not only succeed in the regular season, but to translate that into the postseason. And to me, I would think McCarthy has to get to at least an NFC Championship game. Now, if he gets blown out in the game, that could be a question mark. But if they lose in the championship game, and let's say they're competitive for 2.5 quarters, and then the home team, this is thinking that Dallas is not going to have home field throughout. But if they do show up and kind of fall by the wayside late in that game, I would think McCarthy and maybe Dak does come back. Anything short of that, both of those guys are going to be gone. So you already know, between the First Takes of the world and all the talking head shows and podcasts, and even with yours truly to a certain extent, but this is why I'm bringing it up now, because I don't want to regurgitate these narratives throughout the course of week 2, week 5, week 9, week 14. I don't want to hear it, because we already know what it's going to be from here on out. If Dallas gets off to a 1-4 start, or if they get off to a 4-1 start, or if they're 10-2 as they get to the final stretch of games throughout the season. We've known that they've had success here over the last 3 years, as evidenced by 12-5 records each of the last 3 years. But what has it gotten them? 1 playoff win. So that's all you need to know about this regime as far as what they need to do this year. They are literally singing for their supper and hoping that they get not only contract extensions, but hopefully some possible hardware in winning an NFC Championship and then possibly even a Super Bowl, dare I say. So that is another storyline. And then a couple others on the honorable mention. I'm going to look at the Lions taking that next step, considering where they've been throughout the course of in the Super Bowl era. The franchise not getting to an NFC championship game for the first time since the 91 season when they faced off against at the time, Redskins and lost. And then here they were last year where they should have gone to the Super Bowl, as we know, not to rehash what Dan Campbell did, trying to kick field goals, going for it, etc. But the Lions, let's see where they're going to go here, because now this team, who a lot of people thought they were going to be good, considering how they closed out the previous season, winning at Lambeau, sweeping the Packers, and then even though on the outside looking in as far as the playoff picture, but because they were over 500 and had a good feel going into last year, and what did they do? They went all the way to an NFC Championship game. So now they got to take the next step. So that's another underlying storyline that I will look at. And then the same token, the team that they played against, the Niners, with all of what's transpired in this offseason between the Brandon Ayuk contract extension fiasco, which finally was resolved late last week, Trent Williams, who just signed on the dotted line with his extension, that could now be put out to sea. The unfortunate incident, and thankfully it wasn't fatal for the rookie wide receiver, Ricky Pearsall. He's fine. He's going to be on the non-football illness list over the first 4 weeks, but from what I heard is that he was actually practicing just yesterday, so kudos to him, and I'm glad that he's okay. But the Niners, they're another team. They've been to the dance twice, albeit against the Chiefs both times. But Kyle Shanahan, he hasn't been able to get over the hump. Could the Niners, will there be some hangover going in? They have the Jets there on Monday night, as we know. Can they get off to a good start? And with I would think, a competitive NFC West, Rams look like they're going to be hanging around, as they had a good year last year making the postseason. Seattle, they could be a surprise under new coach Mike Macdonald. Arizona, maybe not so much, but they do have a playmaker there in Kyler Murray. But with the Eagles, with the Cowboys, with the Lions, maybe even the Bears, could they be a surprise this year? And teams like that, the Falcons, who I think is another one of those underlying stories, because they're not going to be at the forefront when we're talking about the Chiefs or the Ravens or teams like that. But the Falcons, and that will be the final one, do they have a team that could be a dark horse, that could be one that will make some noise considering bringing in Kirk Cousins and the two defensive players that they just brought in over the last month, if your name is Matthew Judon or Justin Simmons. And they have the weapons there on offense, as we know, the Drake Londons of the world, the Kyle Pitts, the Bijan Robinsons, and with Kirk Cousins, who is a very good quarterback. And I'll say very good because he can put up good numbers. But in the game that you absolutely have to have, sometimes, more often than not, he spits the bit. So Atlanta's another team that a lot of people will look at and see with what they've done this offseason and with Arthur Blank trying to get back to a Super Bowl. We all know what happened there with the 28-3 lead against New England, having another shot to possibly go back. So I think that's also another underlying storyline there. And then the last one I have, and this is going to be a weird one, but you know where I'm coming from when I say it. Tom Brady on Fox. He has this first game this coming Sunday in Cleveland where the Cowboys will invade right off of Lake Erie. And how Brady's going to perform here, because we've seen over the years, whether your name is Tony Romo and him being that guy that everybody just raved about, predicting plays before they happen, so on and so forth. And then now it becomes, I hate to say it, but he's just like a court jester where he just wants to be funny and tries to make a 4th and 1 in the first quarter out to be Armageddon. And to me, that ship is unsailed. I'm not on the Tony Romo bandwagon. I never have been, but as far as him being a broadcaster goes, to me, that shtick is done. We know, to me, the guy is Troy Aikman. He's fantastic. He's the best in the business when it comes to being a color commentator. And we could go through Chris Collinsworth, who I like, but, I can understand he can wear on you in his voice. Hey, I get that. And I got nothing personal against Collinsworth. I think he's good. But now we're going to get to see Brady here at the forefront, Fox with Kevin Burkhardt, to see whether or not, A, he's going to be critical, that he's going to be able to let the game breathe a little bit, that he's going to also analyze, is he going to go, I'm not going to say the Tony Romo route, but he may say, oh, look at this formation here. Let's say it's 3rd and 2, and it's 5 wide, and you're not expecting the Browns to do that. And he could say, oh, wait a minute, watch so-and-so in the slot here, and not necessarily predict that he's going to be in the flat or he's going to go cut an inseam there to the post. But we're going to get to see Brady here. We can't just bank it all on one game. We have to wait and see throughout the course of the year. And I don't know where I'm going to be Sunday because it's going to be nice. I'm going to watch Steelers-Falcons and may watch the beginning of Cowboys and Browns, but I may not get a full sense of Brady until maybe we get a little bit deeper into the year. So that is my plethora of storylines when we go into this 2024 season. Now, as far as a breakdown of the divisions, I'll go AFC East all the way to the NFC West, just to give you an overview of these teams, and then, of course, I'll go into a couple other things from there. AFC East, a lot of people think that this could be the most competitive division in football. Now, I understand you got the Patriots there, and to discuss the Patriots, to put them out, rookie head coach in the one, Gerard Mayo. Right now, it's Jacoby Brissett under center. You would think he's going to make way for Drake May when it's all said and done, but the Patriots are going to have their growing pains with the coach, with the quarterback. Let's see how Mayo's going to act in these press conferences when the team, let's say, starts to unravel here, not necessarily internally with the locker room, but just as far as losing goes. If they start off, let's say, I don't know, if they're 1-7 and then the media up there, they're going to bombard them with the same question 10 different ways. And will Mayo just all of a sudden become mute? Will he become Belichick light? Or will he expound on things to kind of make his own identity as opposed to following his former coach's footsteps? So that's what I have with the Patriots. So I think they're going to have a long year. Buffalo, it's quite possible that they are going to be the team to beat. I get it that you got the Jets, the Dolphins, who had a 2.5-game lead with 3 or 4 to go before they spit the bit against Buffalo, and the Bills won the division. But for the Bills, I think that this is a year where a lot of focus will be on them, but they may be just a tad under the radar. Similar to last year when they were 6-6 and they ran the table to the point where I'm not going to say they should have won. You could argue that, but they could have won that game against the Chiefs in the division round if Stephon Diggs jumped for that ball that went right through his arms. If he would have caught that, that would have set up the Bills there deep in Chief territory, and who knows how the game would have played out from that point on. But I think Buffalo, I'm not going to say they're sneaky good. We know they're good, but I think they're a team that could be dangerous. Now, they don't have Matt Milano, who is out with a triceps injury, And that's one of their anchors on defense. And again, their defense could be hit or miss, hot or cold. They're not going to be in the top 10, but they won't be in the bottom 10. They'll be ranked somewhere in the middle, but with Milano out, that's a big loss. I don't think he's out for the year, but he could be out for at least the first 8 games. So Buffalo with Allen, and I get it that you have a guy in Stephon Diggs who's out, where they had to bring in some reinforcements there, and I know that that's kind of tricky because you don't know what the receiver core, especially when you have a guy like Allen there under center and you know he's going to want to throw the ball all over the lot. But with Keon Coleman, a guy that they drafted, could be the one to supplant Diggs and be that guy. And of course, Gabe Davis is now in Jacksonville. So although their offense may not be spectacular when it comes to the wideouts and things of that nature, but they may be able to piecemeal it enough for them to win another division. As far as the Jets go, I know I talked about them a bit. Their defense is going to be very good, as we know. Offensively, they do have the pieces there with the line that they've had to makeshift throughout the course of this year, bringing in guys like John Simpson, Tyron Smith from the Cowboys, as well as bringing in a guy like the wide receiver Mike Williams from the Chargers. So let's see what they're going to do as far as trying to go up and down the field and have their defense try to keep teams under 17, and they'll probably win a lot of 20-17, 23-16 type games. So that's what you have there with the Jets. Well, I think they're going to have a big year. Can they win a division? I think they can. Will they? I don't know just yet, because again, it all banks on the health of the quarterback. And speaking of which, Tua, he got the big money, a lot of pressure on him. We know the weapons that they have there down in Miami. Defensively, maybe a little bit of a stretch to kind of keep them in games. Maybe the coach there will look at it as far as winning with shootouts as opposed to trying to win a tight, close to the vest type game. And when you look at a guy like Mike McDaniel, who is an offensive wizard, with Tua, with Tyreek Hill, with Jalen Waddle, and to have those pieces intact, you would think that they're going to have a big year. But we all know with the Dolphins, going even back to the days of Dan Marino, can they win a game on the road in January in a cold, hostile environment? That's what it's going to boil down to. So they're going to need to be at least, in my eyes, a 2 seed, which they would have had if they would have beaten Buffalo in that last game there in their building on Sunday night. Obviously, that wasn't the case. They fell apart. They had to go to Kansas City, and we know what happened. So if the Dolphins could somehow, some way be a 2 seed in the AFC, at least they have the opportunity to have 2 home games in their building before having to go on the road, and maybe in all likelihood, it could be Kansas City. As far as the AFC North goes, we know that is going to be a hold my beer. You want to say competitive divisions? We know that the Ravens representing in the championship game last year, and to me, as I mentioned before, what Lamar's going to do is going to be huge. Their defense, with guys that had left on the team, in particular Patrick Queen, who's now on the other side of the rivalry in Pittsburgh, and trying to see whether or not that they're going to be a team that is going to do it more on offense or defense. As we all know, that organization has been all about defense. And although they have fast guys in their secondary, but I wonder some of those losses that they've had, is that going to be a detriment to that team where they may give up more points than score on any given day, depending on what Lamar does, more so with his legs and arm. If they keep him in the pocket and have him sail balls over wide receivers or running backs' heads. But I think Baltimore is going to have a good year. They have a first-place schedule, so it's going to be a little bit tricky. But I think the Ravens will definitely be in the hunt for one of the top seeds, if not top, but maybe a 2nd or 3 seed. I don't think anything will be as low as that, but I think they'll play well. Cincinnati, it's all going to be based on Burrow. He's a guy that's on a mission this year based on a lot of things that I read. Now you have the Jamar Chase, even to a certain extent T. Higgins. Remember, he requested a trade, wanted more money, knowing that Jamar Chase was going to get his at some point, and Chase, no doubt about it, is a better receiver than Higgins, although Higgins is no slouch. But now having that hang over their heads, they're a young team with a young coach. I understand he's been there now for a few years, same with Burrow and that regime. But Burrow's going to have to be a guy that's going to have to really take over that locker room if Chase is going to be disgruntled, if he's going to feel as if he's being shortchanged, if he doesn't sign on the dotted line, let's say come Sunday before they play New England in their opener. So that's something to keep in mind as you head into the season. But if the Bengals, especially if their quarterback is healthy, they could be as good as a threat as anybody in the AFC. And just ask the Chiefs, as once in the postseason, the Bengals were able to beat them in a championship setting. They almost had an opportunity to do so the second time around 2 years ago. And in the regular season, they beat them a couple of times until last year, but that was Jake Browning under center and not the LSU quarterback and one Joe Burrow. Then you have the Browns, who I would think with Deshaun Watson, if they're going to have him for the whole year, they should be competitive. I get it. You're not going to have Nick Chubb for the first 4 games, but with Amari Cooper and with their team defensively, as we all know, very good. And we would also think they brought in Jerry Jeudy from the Broncos to add another weapon to Deshaun Watson. They're another team that is almost, I'm not going to say it's a wild card, but to me, they could either be 8-9 or they could be 12-5 like last year. And think about it. They were 12-5 last year with not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 different quarterbacks, including Joe Flacco, who went into the postseason, and we saw them fall apart there in that wild card game against the Texans. So Cleveland, to me, I think they're going to have a good year. I would think Watson, with another year under his belt there in Cleveland. Remember, he came back from the suspension 2 years ago, then started the year, and then had that big win against the Ravens on the road where they came from behind, but then got hurt and was gone for the rest of the year with the shoulder injury. So now, Cleveland, it's all up to them to see whether or not they can have a big year. I think they could have a big, and you know what? I'll take that back. I think they will have a big year, but will it be big enough for them to go deep into January and to the heights of a Super Bowl? I don't think so. But I can see another 12-5 season in front of them based on their talent and Watson getting more acclimated and being 100% healthy. So just keep that in mind as we move it along. Steelers, I'll get to last, people. I'll wrap that up on the back end to kind of give you a preview. AFC South. To me, this is a division where any one of those 4 teams, maybe not Tennessee, but who knows? With a new coach there and with a scenario where Houston, I think that they could do some big things and some good things this year, but they're going to be more of the hunted this year, not the huntee. We saw what C.J. Stroud and DeMeco Ryans did in their first year. They won a playoff game, the aforementioned Brown game, before losing in Baltimore. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to pick them as the sexy, trendy pick. But now they're going to have some games on the schedule where they're going to hit primetime. And can you believe this? They were, I don't know how many teams in the league, but they were the one team last year that played all their games Sunday at 1. They didn't have a 4 o'clock game. They didn't have a primetime game. And here they are. Now they're going to have 2 late in the year in December, that Saturday situation where they're going to have the doubleheader where I believe they're playing Kansas City and Baltimore plays Pittsburgh. And then on Christmas Day, Baltimore is going to play Houston and Kansas City plays Pittsburgh. And they're going to have a plethora. I believe week 2, they're going to play the Bears on Monday night, ESPN. So they're going to have a bunch of games where a lot of people are going to be watching, and you wonder whether or not Stroud is going to pick up from where he left off last year. That's the big question if you ask me with Houston. I would think they'll have a good year, but would I be surprised if they go the other way? And when I say the other way, they're not going to go 6-11, but they may not be 10-7, 11-6, the fringe of a division or a wild card. They could be 7-10, 8-9, depending on injuries and aptitude, etc. Colts, Anthony Richardson, what are we going to get from him? Showed some flashes before he got hurt. Colts, to me, I'm not going to say they're a nondescript team, but I have to see with Richardson playing consistently what type of team are they going to be. Because as of right now, I don't know. They could be 6-11 or they could be 10-7 and on the fringe. So I need to see more of him. Last year was Gardner Minshew, and even though he filled in nicely and came that close to winning a division and going into the postseason, but as we saw there on that Saturday night, they lost to Houston and they were nowhere to be found from that point on. Jacksonville was a massive disappointment last year. And now Trevor Lawrence has the big bucks. Doug Peterson with a lot to prove considering last year or 2 years ago, they won that playoff game down 27-0. I get it was to the Chargers and they have the worst luck known to man when it comes to these games. But they did win a playoff game and were competitive in Kansas City the following week. But last year were 8-5 and fell apart, collapsed through the remainder of the season where they didn't make the playoffs. And now you have a scenario where they have to go all in. They're going to get that stadium refurbished and built to where they're going to have more fans come in, considering that Lawrence is now in tow for the next 5 years, and you would think beyond. And now it's going to be a case where Jacksonville certainly has to be on the bounce back, because if they regress again this year, the quarterback's going to be there, but I don't know about the coach. And then Tennessee, that's a rebuild there. With that team, Will Levis is going to be your guy. Malik Willis, who they thought was the guy, he's gone. He's now on another team. And he just recently signed elsewhere. Off the top of my head, it does kind of elude me right now. But the Titans, they're going to do it with growing pains. Yes, they brought in some players. And yes, they're trying to be respectable in that division. But I think Tennessee could have a long year. Could they be a surprise maybe early on? Who knows? But I don't think Tennessee, when it's all said and done, will be in contention there as far as the AFC Central goes. And then out west, to me, it's the Chiefs and everybody else. We know about the Chiefs. Do we even need to get into that? We talked about that at the top of the three-peat. To me, who's going to come in second? Maybe right now, you could argue it's going to be a battle between the Raiders and Chargers. I would say Chargers only based on the better quarterback over both the Raiders and the Broncos. Bo Nix and Sean Payton, maybe they can surprise some people, but surprise some people what? 7-10? To me, that's no big deal. Maybe the Broncos, considering they traded Jerry Jeudy, they only have Courtland Sutton. That was their last big piece that they have there offensively. Defense, Justin Simmons is gone. Not that he was a big-time defensive player, but obviously he was a good player, Pro Bowl player. So for the Broncos, I could see this being a lean year. Maybe be competitive and feisty, but nothing to the point where they could be a threat there in the AFC West. And then with the Chargers, what's going to happen with Jim Harbaugh? Is he going to be a guy that they're going to rally the troops? They're going to come flying out of the gate. They do play the Raiders there in their first week, so maybe he could show Antonio Pierce and the Raiders to get off to a good start in order for them to be of relevancy, considering that since they moved to LA, they have been anything but that. And as I mentioned before, your quarterback is Gardner Minshew. Yeah, he's resourceful, and he's a guy that he's a good relief pitcher. But if he's a guy that's going to bank on 16 weeks, that's why I think the Chargers will have a step ahead of them in that division. Could they be a playoff team? They could, but to me, a lot of things have to break right because the rest of the conference is just stacked, as I alluded to earlier. And that's pretty much your AFC West. I know that was a breeze, but really, what can you get in about Denver? Sean Payton back there with a rookie quarterback. How far can they go? I mean, seriously. And then, like I mentioned, with the Chargers and the Raiders, is Gardner Minshew going to be the answer there in the desert? I don't think so. NFC East. Now, Cowboys, I talked about them before. I think they're going to have another big regular season. Why not? They're going to be a team that could win. Their number's 9.5 in Vegas. They could win probably anywhere between 11 to 12 games. Would you be surprised to go 12-5 again and then flip of the coin come middle of January? Quite possibly. But it's going to be between them and the Eagles. And the Eagles, you think they're going to be renewed? Do you think they're going to be retooled with Saquon Barkley now in the backfield to go along with Jalen Hurts? Who knows if you're going to have a lot of tush pushes this year? No Jason Kelsey under center, as we know. No Fletcher Cox, as we know, as those two mainstays on the offensive and defensive line are no longer there. So you're going to have a bit more of a new identity with those two squads and those two factions of their offensive defense. But with AJ Brown and Devontae Smith to go along with Barkley and Dallas Goedert and Hurts, I know he has to have a bounce back year to a certain extent. I mean, they did start off 10-1 last year before they fizzled out. But the Eagles, I think, will still, even though the Cowboys won last year, but I think the Eagles, they have a little bit more to prove. And with the media there, wondering if there's a Sirianni / the coach, Nick Sirianni / Jalen Hurts, a little bit of a disconnect there. I'm sure they did whatever it takes to kind of mend those fences if there were any type of beef between the coach and the quarterback. I would think it's going to be neck and neck between those two teams all year. As far as the Giants, this is Daniel Jones, do or die. He has to show and prove whether or not he's going to be the long-term answer. This is going to be his sixth season. Yes, he's had some injuries and did take him to the playoffs and won a game 2 years ago, but now he's going to have to do that again. He's going to have to be one of those guys that is going to have to manage the ball club. They have Brian Daboll as a good offensive mind, and he's going to have to put up some numbers this year. I'm not trying to say he's got to be anywhere in the 45 to 5,000 yards throwing number. We know he could scramble. He's coming off of an ACL. But this is all on him this year, whether or not the Giants are going to go or do anything as far as even make it as a wild card team, let alone be in the wild card mix there late in the season. And then the Commanders, even with Jaden Daniels, you think there's going to be some growing pains, some bumps and bruises. There's a lot of promise there in Washington. New regime. They changed the name of the stadium. What's it called? Northwest Stadium now? They need to just move back to D.C. I get it that it's a landmark there, the old RFK, which I believe is still up if they haven't knocked it down. And I know there was discussions about that, but just put a new ballpark, can't even make it like RFK, to where it's almost a new and improved 2024 version of it, as opposed to just making it out to be one of these antiseptic, just state-of-the-art with everything. Make it outdoors, make the facade, the outside, just like what the Wilpons did with Citi Field to make it more like Ebbets Field. Make that new stadium similar to the old RFK. and have it to where you could go back to DC, go back to downtown, and build your fan base back to where it once was, going back to the days of the Hogs in the 80s. But I think Washington, they may have their moments, show some competitiveness, but I don't think it's going to be anything more than that. The NFC North is going to be intriguing. Packers looking to bounce back after what happened last year. We talked about the Lions earlier. I think they're going to have a big year. Where they go, how far they go, that's the big question. But for Green Bay, with Jordan Love beating Dallas the way they did, and they should have beaten San Francisco. Let's call it as we see it in the divisional round. But now Jordan Love's got his money, and the Packers bringing in pieces and trying to see what they could do with a young offense, still a young coach who's been very successful here, Matt LaFleur, as we know. Their defense, they have a couple of players, but certainly not a team that is going to thwart the opposition when it comes to just locking down defenses or locking down offenses, excuse me. I mean, they have a pretty decent secondary. Their pass rush is so-so, but Green Bay, you would think this is going to be an offensive-laden team. A lot of people expect them to go far. Let's see what they're going to do with Love there now, your long-term quarterback. And speaking of which, with the Bears, I didn't want to drop a nanosecond of the Hard Knocks on HBO, but for everything that I've read and seen, Caleb Williams looked like he's going to be the guy. This is a team that has brought in some pieces. This is a team that looks like they're going to be ready to maybe not be part of the playoffs, but if the Lions, let's say, take a step or two back and the Packers are still right there, maybe the Bears could flirt with 10-7, 11-6 to win a division. It's not out of the realm of possibility. Now, I think a lot has to break right. Let's see if Caleb Williams could have a CJ Stroud type of year. And for Matt Eberflus, the coach, we got to see whether or not he's going to have it in him to kind of navigate this team, knowing that he could be on his last legs with this quarterback and with this organization. So it's a big year for him. But I think Caleb Williams could be a guy that could come out of the gate flying. I'm sure he's going to have his moments where he'll have one of those 14 for 29 and 3 picks. But if they keep it simple, if they keep it just straight enough for where Caleb Williams can make some plays, not only with his arm, but with his legs, show that Heisman Trophy ability that he did at USC last year. And if the Bears, if they could somehow, not to say it's going to be Dick Butkus, Mike Singletary, monsters of the Midway, but they could keep themselves in games so where the quarterback could bail them out. So those 3 teams there, I think, could be very competitive in that division. And as far as the Vikings, when J.J. McCarthy went down, Sam Darnold is your starting quarterback. Not to knock him, but that's all you need to know. The Vikings could have a long year. And in that division, who knows? They could probably get spit up and swallowed out, or swallowed up and spit out, you know what I mean, before you even get through the halfway point of the year. NFC South, Falcons. Talked about them already. I think there's, maybe not in Atlanta, but if you've seen what they've done this offseason, there has to be some pressure on them for them to win this year. So that means win a division, which the division is winnable. I don't want to hear it. Carolina, they're going to have their bumps and bruises again. Year 2, Bryce Young trying to fortify that offensive line for him and having some weapons and pieces around him. It's probably going to be a couple more years before he succeeds. The Saints, you have an aging guy there at Derek Carr. Who knows what the coach, Dennis Allen, who's not a good coach. I know he's a better defensive coach than he is a head coach. And last year, a lot of people thought they were going to win the division, and they fell flat. I picked them and the Falcons as unders, and they just did so by the hair of their chinny chin chins. So I don't expect the Saints to do anything big, even though they do have some defensive players. Offensively, they could be from hunger, because it's not as if you have the Alvin Kamara of a few years ago, the Michael Thomas, who was an All-Pro, or Jimmy Graham, who was also an All-Pro. You don't have those type of guys there anymore. So I would think this is going to be a duke it out between Atlanta and Tampa, who won a division. Baker Mayfield signing that 3-year, $100 million deal, bringing back Mike Evans. They still have pretty much, I'm not going to say that Super Bowl core intact because Devin White is gone. A lot of those guys on defense aren't there. But if they could still remain consistent and Baker could stay away from the big mistake, Tampa Bay could be a part of this division mix with them in Atlanta. But I think Atlanta's going to win. Tampa could be a playoff team as a wild card. But to me, I think there's a lot of pressure on the Falcons. And they could be a team that, I think if you ask me, the Falcons not only have to win a playoff game, but they have to be competitive on the road in the division game. Because anything less than that, then what did you do? Unless Cousins gets hurt again, and we know Cousins is coming off his own Achilles injury. So I think it's Atlanta's division to lose, but Tampa's going to be lurking there, and Carolina and New Orleans, I think they're going to have long years. long enough years. And then in the West, which I think is a sneaky competitive division, we know about the Niners, talked about them, the hangover, everything that happened in training camp, and then now they got to start up the engines again to see if they can propel themselves through a long regular season, although we know it goes by quick, but then the postseason, we know how fast that goes, and then to get back to a bowl. And they do play the Chiefs this year in the regular season, so I'm sure the last thing they want to see is number 15 again, and I'm sure if they go back to a Super Bowl, the Chiefs are the last team they even want to see across on the other sideline. But the Niners, I think they're still going to be stout. They're still going to be good. But the Rams, with what they've done, trying to draft a lot of defensive players with Aaron Donald now walking off into the sunset and Matthew Stafford a year older, and how much more does he have left in that right arm? That also remains to be seen. But they do have some good guys on offense. We know about Puka Nacua. Their running backs are by committee, but they get the job done. And what they're going to be able to do defensively is going to be huge in order for that team to be kept in games and not have to rely on the old gunslinging Stafford. So that's how I look at the Rams, although I think they're going to be in the mix there. But I don't know if it's going to be for a division unless San Francisco comes back to the pack to where they only win 12 games as opposed to 13 or 14 in the regular season. And then Seattle with Mike Macdonald, the former coordinator of the Ravens. He's bringing his style. And even with Geno Smith, had an injury there early on. But now with Pete Carroll out and with this new regime in, I've heard there's been a lot of positive vibes around there. Maybe they could be that sneaky team in the NFC as far as making it to the postseason. And they almost did so last year, so why not this year? I know Smith is a guy that when you don't think he's going to do well, he does well. When you think, oh, he's going to have a big game today, then he regresses. So he's hit or miss, but Seattle could be that team that maybe could surprise some people. And I've actually looked at them as a surprise team. I'll get to that in a second. But I think it's going to be Niners, Rams, Seattle, and then the Cardinals with Kyler Murray, and that's a team that's on the rebuild. And thankfully for them, he's still young enough that if in 2 or 3 years, if they build a team the right way, he'll still have his prime years ahead of him. It's not as if he's a guy that is already like 29. He's going to have to wait till he's 32, 33. Not to say that that's old in the least, because we've seen quarterbacks a la Brady, even Rodgers here. And I get it that he fell off a cliff toward the end of his career, but even a guy like Drew Brees, and the same for Ben Roethlisberger, these guys now are playing deep into their 30s and even early 40s. But for Murray, he's younger than that, so he still has some prime years ahead. And I would think Arizona, they're going to have their time somewhere down the road, but it's certainly not going to be this coming year. Now, as far as the Steelers go, here's how I'm going to break down this team in a small nutshell. It is all contingent. You can say this for a bunch of teams. I get it. Their offensive line has to keep Russell Wilson upright. Russell Wilson is not the same player he was 5 years ago. Most definitely not the Super Bowl player that he was when he went to back-to-back championships where they won one and they lost the other, as we all know, to New England. And he's a guy that I'm sure the offense is going to be tailored for him to get the ball out of his hands as quick as possible, similar to Ben Roethlisberger, but they do have Arthur Smith there as the offensive coordinator. So he's a guy that is a good offensive mind. We saw what he did in Tennessee when they went to a championship game a few years ago. That was when they beat Baltimore, that one MVP year that Lamar Jackson had. So, and they have pieces. They have players. Whether your name is George Pickens, big-time wideout, or Najee Harris to come out of the backfield along with Jalen Warren to have a good tight end and a one Pat Freiermuth. And they have some supplementary pieces, Calvin Austin, and guys like that. So I think as long as the offensive line is upright, and they are improving, and they have been gelling considering that that's what they've had to bolster here over the last few years. But is it going to be enough? Because their defense is old. They just re-signed Cameron Hayward to a 3-year deal at the age of 35. TJ Watt, who got his money a couple years ago, but he's now 30. So I'm sure he's still going to be his dominant self, but now he's maybe at the very top of the mountain starting to come down. And the secondary, it's not the Troy Polamalu, Ike Taylor. It's not that secondary, Ryan Clark, etc. This is Joey Porter Jr., who could take a step up and maybe be ranked in one of the top cornerbacks in football, which I would hope to see. Because if that's the case, then at least we know that we have a guy that's going to be in that secondary that a lot of teams are going to have to look out for. But Patrick Queen, I get it. He's an import there for Baltimore who will, with a lot of his speed, and will try to wreak as much havoc. That is going to be huge for the Steelers here, not only this year, but also moving forward to anchor that linebacking core, as well as Alex Highsmith, as we know. Minka Fitzpatrick, he has to have a bounce-back year. He had some injuries last year to see if he could get back to his all-pro self. And when you have guys that you don't really know what you're going to get, Deshaun Elliott, who was a guy who used to play for Baltimore years ago and bounced around the league. Beanie Bishop Jr., a guy that a lot of people, let's see what he's going to do as far as being that nickel, which is very important in that system. When you look at guys like Cam Sutton, who, again, we're not going to see for 8 games, and that's where he's going to play a big part, especially in that second half of the year. But the Steelers and Dante Jackson in that trade with the Carolina Panthers when Deontay Johnson went down there. So you have guys that are question marks, but guys that are also have been in the league for a long time. And because of age, any one of these guys can get hurt at the drop of a hat. And yes, I get it. Even the 21-year-old could get hurt, a la Joey Porter. But if you have Cameron Hayward go for it, would maybe be a 4 to 6 week injury for him. It could be the year. And TJ Watt too. We know how aggressive he comes off that edge. Tears a groin, pulls a hammy, high ankle sprain. That sucker's going to take probably 2 or 3 more weeks on top of the regular prognosis. So I think the Steelers, they'll be a little bit better than last year. And how could you say that? They were 10-7. Well, they're going to be 11-5 or 11-6. And have you looked at that schedule? That's the other thing. If you're a Steeler fan, that's the one thing that's going to just scare the wits out of you. Because after they play Washington on November the 10th, and that's in the nation's capital. And mind you, those first stretch of games, right? It's Atlanta, Denver, the Chargers, Indianapolis, that's at Indy, Dallas, at Vegas, the Jets and Giants on back-to-back weeks in primetime. And think about this. They have 3 primetime home games in October, which I can't stand. I wish that Cowboy game, which is a Sunday night game, I wish that was a 425 Fox game as we've come to know and love over the years. But for the Steelers schedule after Washington, and then they have the bye sandwiched in between that Monday night game against the Giants at home and then at Washington. And I'm sure if you paid attention, wait a minute, JAYREELZ hadn't said Baltimore, Cleveland, or Cincinnati, the teams in their division, which as we all know, they play twice a year. Hold on to your hats. Baltimore, at Cleveland, at Cincinnati, Cleveland, at Philadelphia, at Baltimore, Kansas City, Cincinnati. So 6 of the final 8 games on the schedule are in the division, where the other 2 games are at Philadelphia, in which the franchise's history, they've never won. Whether it was the old JFK Stadium, Veterans Stadium, or the Link, they have never won in Philadelphia in the regular season. And obviously, Kansas City, the defending 2-time champs. On Christmas Day, 1 o'clock Netflix. And even though those last 2 games are at home, and mind you, the imbalance where they have the 9 road games, the 8 home games, but if that's not a gauntlet of a schedule, I don't know what is. So they better get out of the gate fast and get to that Washington game. Let's say if they win that, they have to be minimum 6-3. So if you want to pick 3 losses out of that group, all right, maybe they're losing Denver the Mile High after winning in Atlanta, or maybe they can flip-flop. Atlanta's going to be tough. Chargers at home, at the Colts. That's a game they should win. Dallas, flip of a coin. They played a lot of close games over the years. Just look back to 2004. If you want to even go before the Tomlin era. All those games have been close, within 1 score. At Vegas, where they barely won last year, and then you have both the Jets and Giants back-to-back weeks. 5-4 wouldn't cut it, because that means they would have to go 6-2 down that stretch of those just gauntlet of games. So I think the Steelers, they'll probably be 10-7, no more than 11-5, but I don't know. That schedule and the back end, that is as brutal as it gets. Now let me get to my surprise and disappointments before I get to my over-unders. My surprise team this year, I'm going to pick the Bears. I'm picking them because this is Eberflus's, to me, it's going to be his last shot, and I'm not trying to make him out to be Mike Ditka. But I would think with the quarterback that they finally have, we understand Justin Fields did not work out, and who knows where Fields is going to step in if Wilson gets hurt or whatever, or if Wilson flames out here. Because you know the fans are going to be clamoring for Justin Fields if Wilson gets off to a sluggish start. But again, I digress. I think the Bears, they were competitive last year to an extent where they ended up 7-10 in the middle part of that year. They won some games. Now, granted, it's last year. I get it. What does that mean for this year? But the Bears, I think they're going to be a little bit feisty. And knowing that they finally have their quarterback, and this is an organization, as we all know, they go back to the beginning of time with the longest standing rivalry against Green Bay. But when was the last big-time quarterback they ever had? Don't say Jim McMahon. He was a good quarterback, but he wasn't a top-flight, top 10 quarterback during his heyday. you got to go back to Sid Luckman, and we're talking about the 30s and 40s. Because Rex Grossman, who took him to the Super Bowl, not that guy. Cade McNown, who they drafted out of UCLA in 99, not that guy. Justin Fields, you already know. So now they got their guy here. And I think Caleb Williams knows that the city is going to rally and bank on him to take him to places unknown. Is it going to happen this year? I don't think so. So what I mean surprises, when we get to the final couple of weeks of the season, will they be a fringe team in the NFC? Because if they are, then great. And I'm not talking about when you see Steve Kornacki, where they have a 5% shot. So let's say the team, they got to leapfrog over 3 teams to get to that 7 seed. And that 7 seed, let's say, is 9-6, but the Bears are 6-9, but they're still in the playoff hunt. No. That's not going to count in my book. To me, they got to be hovering around 500 or maybe a game under 500 to where they're within striking distance. So to me, that would be a surprise for the Bears. So keep an eye on them. My disappointment is going to be, and I kind of hinted at this earlier, is going to be the Texans. They're going to be the hunted. They have primetime games, sophomore jinx. That's not to say they're going to go 4-13, but can you see them have a tough year? Can you see some injuries? Can you see some scenarios where people are going to be gunning for Houston? They're not going to overlook them on the schedule. They're going to know that, oh, wait, I got a primetime game against the Texans? No, we got to represent. And CJ Stroud, for all of his brilliance, great rookie year, etc. That's not to say he's going to fall flat on his face, but is it going to be a scenario where they're going to have to really go through the motions to kind of get themselves? Now, they play in a bad division, or let's say a subpar division, because Jacksonville, they have talent, and Indianapolis, we don't know about Richardson, but still. So they may win the division when it's all said and done. But if Jacksonville gets off to the start they had last year, and let's say they play from in front and they stick from in front, then Houston's going to scramble around to try to get a wild card. And if they're going to go up against some of these teams that are going to be pretty much neck and neck, who knows? Will they be able to withstand that pressure? They did so last year in winning the division and beating Indianapolis on the road. Big time chore, but I don't know. I just see just a slight tad of disappointment to where a lot of people may have them as a trendy pick. A lot of people could be looking at them as a dark horse, a team that, oh, well, they went to a division round last year. If they get in, they may have a chance to go to an AFC Championship game. I'd pump the brakes if I was rooting for the Texans. So that's what you have there with the surprise and disappointments. All right, let's get to my over-unders. And thankfully, I have them right here. I don't have to go through them to the point where, oh, I left one out. Let me just guess one. But I have 4 overs and 2 unders. Usually I go 3-3, but this time I'm switching it up. My overs, 8.5 Atlanta Falcons for everything that I detailed. I think a team that should win 10 games. They play in a weak division. I get it that the schedule is a little bit tricky when we look at the Falcons overall. Steelers right out of the gate. Then they have to go to the Eagles and the Chiefs to start. That could be 1-2 minimum, maybe even 0-3 if it breaks wrong. But then they have Saints, Bucks, Panthers, Seahawks at home, Bucks, Cowboys in their building. A lot of the division, as we know, Broncos, they play the AFC West, Raiders, Chargers, nondescript type teams, Giants, Commanders, so they do play the NFC East as well. They could beat up on those teams. To me, they should win 10 in their sleep, and especially if they get off to a good start. Let's say they go 2-1 to start the year. Let's say that they beat Pittsburgh, and for whatever reason, at home against the Chiefs, they eke out a 30-27 win. Then you know they're going to be a lot of expectations and riding high. So I'm picking Atlanta's an over 8.5. My next over, since I picked them as a surprise, and who knows, they could be right on that cusp. 8-9, flirting with a possible playoff spot, but I'm going to see if they win 9, and that's the Chicago Bears for everything I discussed. I think they're going to hang around. I think the Bears are a team, as for everything that I just mentioned. I'm going to take a look at their schedule real quick because that's also going to be, and right, picking these picks with my gut. I wasn't trying to peruse all the schedules and to see where these teams were as far as, oh, how is the schedule going to play out and go through a win-loss scenario. I was not going to do that. But as far as their schedule goes, Titans, then they have the Texans. That's the one I was talking about, 8:15 Sunday night. So they played the AFC South, which that's could bode well for them. I understand Jacksonville, Houston are going to be tricky. But then they do have the Panthers. They play the NFC West. Sorry, a little bit tricky for them there. But I think within the division, with twice against Minnesota, and even if they split the other 2 games with the Lions and the Green Bay Packers, That's 4 wins right there. Now, you mean to tell me they can't get 5 other wins, whether you're, again, Panthers, they play the Colts, Texans, those are on the road. I get it, those are tricky. But can they get another 5 wins after that? Let's see. All they need is really 4 wins to get to 8, because the number's 7.5, but I'm going to pick the Bears there as my second pick. I hate to do this, and this is part 1 of I hate to do this. I'm going to pick the Browns as an over. Their number's 7.5 too. They won 12 with 4 quarterbacks. That's all you need to know. And if Watson's going to be there healthy, and the targets that he has, and with Myles Garrett, Defensive Player of the Year, etc., why can't this team, even in a very uber competitive division, why can't they win at least 10? They can win 8 unless everything just falls apart. Watson gets hurt, Garrett is out for the year. Unless it gets that bad, I can see the Browns, and this is not a reverse jinx, people. I can see the Browns. 7.5? Really? Now, they are the Browns. Understood. If their number was 9 or 9.5, I'd be a little skeptical. Because you're right, you can't base last year on this year, but I'm just using that as a parameter considering the circumstances of their quarterback position. So yes, I'm picking them as an over. My final over, I'm picking the Buccaneers. And I know this is a strange one, but because the number was 6.5, they made the playoffs at 9. They have Carolina and the Saints. So even if they go 3-1 against them, and I understand if they split, but let's say they go 3-1. All you need is 4 more wins. All right, so maybe you split one of the 2 against the Falcons. So now you just need 3 more. And if we take a look at the schedule, I'm sure 3 more is not going to be impossible. In fact, they start the season against the Commanders in their building where you know it's going to be 1,000 degrees. You mean to tell me they can't win that game? So let's just say if it breaks that way, that's already 5 games I got. And I understand I got to play the game still. But you mean to tell me 6.5, they can't get to 7 in that division? That's why I'm picking them as an over, and I think they're going to flirt with a wild card. So that is my 4th pick. Now my 2 unders. Under number 1, 7.5. I know it's right on the cusp, considering they had a good year last year and they were that close for the postseason. Anthony Richardson's going to have to prove something to me, and he probably will. He'll probably make me look foolish, and the next thing you know, the Colts will be off to a great start, riding high, and I'm going to look foolish. And I believe last year, didn't I pick a team that they just went right out of the gate and just blew? Oh, baseball, I know I've done that with Cleveland, and also another team that I picked as an under. I forgot who it was. But anyway, how I look at the Colts, their quarterback, I don't even know who their backup is. That just goes to show you. And defensively, they've had some personnel changes. No Eric Armstead. We know about Shaq Leonard. He's gone. So it's not as if that identity, which was very good on that defensive side once upon a time, and I'm not trying to make them out to be the 85 Bears, but we knew that during the, I'm not going to say heyday, because now you're going back to Peyton Manning, Dwight Freeney, Robert Mathis, etc. But it's a scenario where the Colts did have some good players defensively, just as short as a few years ago. But they were unable, whether it was Matt Ryan, whether it was any other quarterback that went in there, Carson Wentz, to try to take their team to the promised land. And they had very good defensive players there for that time period just a few years ago. And what did it amount to? Nothing. And now, with those 2 aforementioned gone, I don't know where the Colts or how they're going to perform here, especially defensively. And the quarterback, although there's potential, is a question mark. I'm picking the Colts 7.5 as an under. And yes, this is not a reverse jinx either, but I got to call it as I see it. He's had this winning streak unlike any other as a head coach. He has never fallen under 500. He is now going into his 18th season, longest tenured coach in the National Football League. The back end of that schedule scares me. If his team starts off 5-4, could you see that team go 3-5, especially if there are injuries to the defense that I just talked about a little while ago, to the elder statesman, whether it's the guy who just signed on the defensive line or their all-pro, the former defensive player of the year, outside linebacker, or their all-pro free safety. Yes, people, if you're watching on YouTube, emblazoned across the chest, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Their number is 8.5. Obviously, 9 would make them over 500, so that streak will continue. They not have to. They absolutely must. 6-3 may be a little bit pie in the sky. 5-4. Now, they know their way around the division, so I'm not afraid about those games. But if the injuries crop up to the elder statesman, if Russell Wilson's having a tough time, if Justin Fields, who has to come in, and not to say he's not going to be able to do the job, but he has butterfingers, as we all know. This is probably the one year that you could absolutely positively, and with a very competitive division, you could actually flirt with the idea of the Steelers going under 500 for the first time in Mike Tomlin's tenure. And sadly, I think this is the year. Based on the schedule. And their schedule is the third hardest. You know what the other two teams are? Baltimore number 1 and Cincinnati 2. Shocker. Because in the division, they're going to, for argument's sake, they're going to pretty much play the same opponents. Granted that the Ravens are going to play San Francisco. I think they do play San Francisco, do they? No, I'm sorry. I got that mixed up. The Ravens will play the top seed in the NFC South, which is Tampa. And I understand that's no big whoop. But they have a first place schedule, as we know. They're not going to play the other first place teams in the conference, where the Steelers, they'll play the third place team in each of the conferences outside of the AFC North. So in the West and in the East, as well as the South, they're only going to play the third place teams, where the Ravens and Bengals will play the second place teams. So that's going to be a difference. But I'm picking the Steelers as an under there. I know, that may hurt the Steeler fan and say, why you know Steeler fan, JAYREELZ? I'm sorry. That's how it is, and that's how it goes, and that's what I see. So to recap, over-unders, Falcons 8.5 is an over, Browns 7.5 is an over, Bears 7.5 is an over, Buccaneers 6.5 is an over, Colts 7.5 is an under, Steelers 7.5 is an under. My knockout pick this week, let's just jump right to it. Dangerous. I get it. And I was waffling back and forth between these two, but I typed it there. I'm going to stick with it. Because of Joe Burrow, I'm going to say Cincinnati over New England. And again, no point spread, whatever. They just have to win the game. I don't care if they win 2-0 or 3-2. As long as they win, that's it. Picking the Bengals week 1, and that's not a reverse jinx too, as I'm not good. Yes, last year I think I went to week 5 before I got knocked out. Usually I'm knocked out after week 1, and that was because I picked the aforementioned, or I should say the previous regime of the Washington football team. I picked them, and that blew up in my face. So that's your knockout pick. And my Super Bowl pick to wrap up. I've gone to this well many times over the years. I'm going to do this one last time. I'm going to sound like Chris Berman in the 90s. What was it? Where they circle the wagons. And Jim Kelly, Thurman Thomas, whatever. I think Buffalo's going to go to Super Bowl this year. I just think that now, maybe with Diggs and maybe not to say it's all on him, we understand that, but not having to deal with the attitude. And I understand he and Allen had a bromance, but a lot of people, I think, when they look for Super Bowl, everybody's going to look for the Chiefs, and I don't think the Chiefs are going to do it. To do it 3 straight years, as I said before, it's not going to happen. It is going to be not necessarily daunting because of Patrick Mahomes, but to do this 3 straight years, it would be historic, obviously, and you would probably have to put him at the top of the food chain right next to Brady, or if not, as a 1A as far as being the GOAT, because even Tom Brady didn't win 3 straight Super Bowls. But I don't know, something tells me Josh Allen, and this is the last time I'm going to pick them to go to Super Bowl, but the team that's going to win, and mind you, he's going to go up against a team that has never been to a Super Bowl and never won a Super Bowl, similar to the Bills, who have been 4 times, as we know, and have gone 0 for 4. I'm picking the Lions. That's right, you heard it here first. Detroit over Buffalo, Super Bowl 59. And the reason being, I would only hope Dan Campbell had a long winter, spring, and early summer to think about what transpired. And we understand he's still going to be that aggressive coach. He's still going to be that guy that's going to try to push different buttons to try to just see if it's going to work or see what fits or what have you. But I think last year was a great building block for this, not only the team, but for the organization. And I get it that there's going to be a bullseye on them because a lot of people are going to be gunning for them this year. There's going to be no surprise, similar to what we've seen in Houston. But Goff, he's a savvy veteran. They have very good offensive players. Their defense, led by Aiden Hutchinson, obviously he's a force. And who knows? This organization, as we all know, has been starving. It's been just in the toilet throughout the Super Bowl era. But maybe this year they get to go back, maybe even host a game in their building, but in the process, learn from what happened there in San Francisco during the championship game get to a Super Bowl, and then beat the Buffalo Bills down in New Orleans in the middle of February. That'll do it, my good people. My NFL preview in the books. Get ready, because later on, depending on when you're listening to this, if you listen to this first thing in the morning, which I hope you do, later on you're going to get the normal podcast that you get on a Thursday, but I'm not going to talk NFL. All the NFL going in. As a matter of fact, let me do this real quick before I say goodbye. Let's go through the schedule real quick. And we pretty much know what the schedule is going to consist of here, especially in this opening week. We know that the game tomorrow night, Baltimore and Kansas City, the Friday night game in Sao Paulo, which I don't like, and I believe there's some civil unrest down there where the players are going to have to stay in their hotels. So much for them trying to go out and explore for a day or a night there down in that region. So you could kiss that goodbye if you're a Packer or Eagle. And then you have the full slate Sunday where the 1 o'clock games, and there's a ton of them, and I'm not going to go through every one, but I know the highlights there. You have Pittsburgh at Atlanta, as we know. Houston at Indy, a division matchup. Let's see how both of those teams stack up. More so Colts against Texans. Then you have, you only have what? 1, 2, 3, about 7 1 o'clocks to 4 o'clocks, or Vegas and the Chargers. We know about Dallas, Cleveland. Everybody's going to keep their eye on that. LA at Detroit, a rematch of the wild card game last year. NBC is the opener there for Sunday Night Football. And then we know about Jets-Niners to cap off week 1. So it should be intriguing, should be interesting. As, yes, if you're thinking on my normal Thursday podcast, you're going to get any NFL unless something breaks overnight with some signings or anything like that. You're not going to get any of it until we get to Monday's podcast. So that'll do it. Another one in the books. Thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about the National Football League. Please subscribe, rate, review on all available platforms, Apple, Spotify, the channel on YouTube at JAYREELZ, and any podcast platform that you play with, as well as Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. If you want to hit me up with a question, comment, or suggestion at the JAYREELZ Podcast. Twitter, X, JAYREELZ1, just a number. The old-fashioned way, the JAYREELZ Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. It's in the blood. It's in the DNA. Talking football, basketball, baseball, golf, tennis, you name it. As the next edition will pretty much come right after this. So you have back-to-back or belly-to-belly when it comes to podcasts today, because you know, being a full-time content creator, this is all I do, people. Go to drinklollipop.com, save 15% using the promo code JAYREELZ. I got another one coming at you, hopefully in the coming days, with nothing but fire, passion, energy, fury, with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens in the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the JAYREELZ Podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx to South Beach to South Central to South Pacific and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the JAYREELZ Podcast, on the flip, baby.